spoke with the controller who was on duty when the number changed on the screen.
It was shortly after that I went on break. Lucivando relieved me.
He tells police about a critical mistake on his part.
You have 5 aircraft. The legacy is at 367.
Before leaving, he handed his flights off to another controller, telling him where he thought the Legacy was flying.
I believe it was at 360, and that's what I told you.
When the new controller took over, the one being relieved gave him the Legacy's altitude information according to the flight plan, 360.
But the jet was actually flying 1,000 feet higher, right in the path of the Gol flight. Colonel Ferreira studies transcripts of conversations on board the Legacy and finds that the crew was having their own difficulties during the flight.
How much longer, guys? That's a good question, Ralph.
The crew seems unfamiliar with some of the jet's advanced systems.
Still working out the kinks on how to work this flight management system. Where's the one that gives us total time?
My impression is that the pilots were trying to learn their aircraft systems during the flight.
Investigators also uncover a breakdown in communications.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima, flight level 370, good afternoon.
November 600 X-ray Lima.
After a brief conversation between the Legacy jet and Brasilia ACC, Colonel Ferreira notices something extremely unusual. For almost an hour, the Legacy pilots don't talk to anyone on the ground.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima.
Palladino did try to get hold of ground control, but he couldn't get through.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima.
He then tried the backup frequencies listed on his navigation charts.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima.
November 600 X-ray Lima.
His only contact, a single garbled message.
6 smoke 5.
Sorry, say frequency one more time for November 600 X-ray Lima.
Both pilots and air traffic controller should have been more concerned of maintaining two-way contact all the time. This is their duty.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima.
Had pilots and controllers spoken, they might have discovered that the Legacy was flying north in a corridor reserved for southbound traffic. As the public learns about the mistakes in the Air Traffic Control Center, there is growing pressure to make some changes.
We wanted to understand what had happened to these people inside the control room. Controllers should have been able to see on their radar screens that these two airplanes were flying in a collision course.
Brazilian air traffic control is one of the last in the world to be run largely by the country's military.
Since they're run by the military, they're run by the Brazilian Air Force, we did not have complete access to information except for what was released.
As fingers are pointed at controllers, many of them come forward with stories of overwork and poor training.
They complained that they weren't well trained in English language, which is the international aviation language. Also, they had complaints about their equipment.
In fact, the controller who incorrectly reported the Legacy's altitude had been on the job for only a year. A valuable piece of the puzzle is still missing. Investigators still don't know what happened during the final minutes of the Gol flight. Soldiers have been scouring the Amazon jungle with metal detectors looking for the plane's missing memory module. Almost a month after the crash, they find it. Colonel Ferreira hopes to hear some reason why the Gol crew wasn't able to avoid colliding with an oncoming jet.
Gol 1907. Contact Brasilia, ACC on 125.2. A good flight.
Thanks very much, Brasilia 1.2. Gol 197.
There are no alarms before the collision. No warning that they were flying straight for another jet. Pilots rely on air traffic controllers to keep other planes out of their path. They spend much of their time monitoring their instruments, not the skies ahead. At the speed they're traveling, they'd only have to look away for a few seconds to miss an approaching plane.
There were no issues of communication and no misunderstanding between the pilots and air traffic control. They had no idea what had just happened to their plane and fought until the end to regain control.
For less than a minute, the pilots struggle for control, but there's nothing they can do. But why were there no warnings? Both planes were equipped with a safety feature designed to prevent exactly this type of accident. Ferreira now needs to know why that system failed. Earlier in the investigation, strange radar images suggested that the Legacy pilots were flying wildly over the Amazon. Now those suspicions have vanished, but Ferreira revisits the fluctuating radar data to understand why neither plane knew the other was coming.
You see, the altitude is varying significantly.
To try to understand this last piece of the puzzle, Colonel Ferreira returns to the radar display that air traffic controllers saw the day of the crash. Instead of displaying just the expected altitude and the actual altitude, the letter Z appears between them.
The Z on the air traffic controller screens indicates that the airplane he's looking at has lost its transponder.
Modern commercial aircraft are equipped with transponders. Like small radio stations, they broadcast information on the plane's altitude and flight number. This information is received by computers on the ground and instantly displayed on the screens of air traffic controllers. In Brasilia, if the transponder fails, so-called primary radar takes over automatically. Signals are sent out from the ground that hit the target and return. Those readings are wildly inaccurate. The inaccuracy of the radar tracking the Legacy jet explains why its altitude appeared to be rising and falling. Investigators discover that the transponder wasn't sending out signals for more than 50 minutes before the crash. But controllers didn't notify the pilots. That may be because they didn't notice the subtle change. There's an even more critical role played by the transponder. It doesn't just beam information to controllers on the ground, but to other planes as well. All commercial aircraft are equipped with a warning system called TCAS, the Traffic Collision Avoidance System. TCAS picks up a signal from an oncoming plane's transponder and issues a warning if it's too close. If either plane's transponder is off, the system won't work.
What the hell is that?
Ferreira discovers that the Legacy's transponder was working early in the flight and after the collision. But for more than 50 critical minutes, it was silent. How had a state-of-the-art jet, just off the factory floor, developed problems with its transponder? Investigators examine the Legacy jet's transponder unit. They discover that the system which controls it had a troubled history. It had been installed on a different plane, but removed because it wasn't working. It was repaired and then placed on the jet that was sold to XLR. Investigators have the system tested, but even with its suspicious past, after the crash they can find no obvious problems with the plane's transponder.